A millionaire sees two poor twin girls standing alone on the street. At first, he's confused, until they turn around, and he sees staring back at him. Then the twins whisper two words that stop his heart cold. "Daddy?" He doesn't recognize them. He doesn't even know their mother. But somehow, they know everything about him. Who are these girls? Why do they look just like him? And what buried truth has been kept from him all these years? This is a story about love lost, secrets buried, and a second chance he never saw coming. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The rain drummed against the tinted windows of the black Mercedes, creating a steady rhythm that matched Xavier Moreau's distant heartbeat. He sat motionless in the back seat, his Crystal Achievement Award clutched loosely in one hand, while the other absently straightened his perfectly tailored suit. The evening's applause still echoed in his ears, but like always, the triumph felt hollow. "Sir?" His driver's voice crackled through the intercom. "The GPS seems to be having issues with the storm." Xavier blinked, pulling himself from his thoughts. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see they were no longer on the familiar highway back to Paris. Instead, narrow country roads wound through dark hills, their edges blurred by a thick blanket of fog. "Take the next right," Xavier instructed, though he was equally unsure of their location. The car curved around the bend, and suddenly, the engine made an uncomfortable grinding sound. The vehicle lurched, sputtered, and died. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Moreau." The driver turned in his seat, his face drawn with concern. "I'll need to check the engine. We appear to be in..." He squinted at a weathered road sign barely visible through the downpour. "Belleville." Xavier nodded, his jaw tight. "How long?" 20 minutes, perhaps? I'll call for assistance if needed." The silence in the car felt suffocating. Xavier loosened his tie and peered out the window. Through the fog and rain, a warm yellow glow caught his attention. A small cafe, its windows glowing like a beacon in the gloom. The sign above the door read, "Café Solace," in elegant script. "I'll wait there," Xavier said, reaching for his umbrella. "Call me when we're ready to continue." The moment he stepped out, the wind whipped at his coat. The umbrella offered little protection against the sideways rain as he made his way toward the cafe. His Italian leather shoes splashed through puddles, but he barely noticed the discomfort. Something about the light from those windows pulled at him, like a memory he couldn't quite grasp. As he approached the entrance, the fog parted just enough to reveal the cafe's warm interior. Mismatched chairs surrounded well-worn wooden tables, and copper pots hung from ceiling beams. It looked lived in, loved, everything his sterile penthouse apartment wasn't. Xavier reached for the door handle, but movement on the other side made him pause. Two identical little faces pressed against the foggy glass, their small hands leaving perfect prints on the surface. They couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Dark curls framed their delicate features, and their eyes. He couldn't look away from their eyes. "Daddy." The word came through the glass in perfect unison, their breath creating new clouds on the window pane. Xavier's hand froze on the handle. Something shifted in his chest, like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. The door creaked open under his grip, bringing with it the smell of fresh bread and coffee. The twins stepped back, still staring at him with an intensity that made his throat tight. A soft gasp drew his attention to the counter. A woman stood there, a porcelain cup slipping from her fingers. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. Her face had gone pale, and she gripped the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. Dark curls escaped from her messy bun, the same shade as the little girl's. Her eyes, their eyes, were fixed on his face with a look of shock and something deeper, something that made his chest ache. "Anna?" The name left his lips without conscious thought, surprising him. He didn't know anyone named Anna. Did he? She took a step backward, then another. Without a word, she turned and fled through a swinging door into what must have been the kitchen. The sound of it closing echoed in the sudden silence. The twins remained rooted to their spot, heads tilted as they studied him. An elderly woman emerged from behind the counter, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her movements calm and deliberate despite the tension in the air. "Girls," she said softly, "why don't you go help your mother with the dishes?" They hesitated, looking between Xavier and the kitchen door. Finally, they moved in perfect synchronization, disappearing the same way their mother had gone. "Monsieur Moreau," the woman said, and Xavier realized she must be Madame Claret, whose name was painted beneath the cafe's sign. "Perhaps you should return another time. The storm is quite severe." Xavier opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His head felt fuzzy, like he was trying to see through static. The woman's eyes were kind, but firm, and something in them told him she knew more than she was saying. A car horn sounded outside. His driver was back. "Your car appears to be ready," Madame Claret said gently. Xavier nodded, still unable to form words. He turned mechanically, pushing the door open against the wind. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, but he barely noticed. His mind was full of dark curls and matching pairs of eyes that seemed to see right through him. As his driver held the car door open, Xavier glanced back one last time. One of the twins had returned to the window. She pressed her small hand against the glass and waved, her face solemn and knowing. The gesture sent another jolt through his chest, and he quickly ducked into the car. "Everything all right, sir?" his driver asked, noting Xavier's unusual pallor. Xavier didn't answer. He watched the cafe grow smaller in the rear window, its warm light gradually swallowed by the fog. The last thing he saw was that tiny hand against the glass, waving goodbye to a stranger who felt, impossibly, like someone she'd been waiting for all along. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains at the Belvine Inn, but Xavier had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those little faces pressed against the cafe window, their voices echoing in his mind. "Daddy." The word haunted him, along with the image of Anna's pale face as she dropped that cup. He sat on the edge of the simple bed, his usual crisp suit wrinkled from tossing and turning all night. The room was modest, nothing like his luxury penthouse, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts kept drifting back to the cafe, to Anna's dark curls and those eyes that seemed to know him. A knock at the door startled him. "Mr. Moreau," his driver called. "I've checked with the mechanic. The car won't be ready until this afternoon. Something about a part they need to order." Xavier ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Thank you, Pierre. Take the morning off." Once alone again, he walked to the small window. Through the morning mist, he could just make out the cafe's weathered sign in the distance. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened his tie. "Just coffee," he muttered to himself. "I'm just going for coffee." The walk to Café Solace took less than 10 minutes. Morning light painted the village in soft colors, so different from the previous night's gloom. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the scent of fresh pastries and coffee wrapped around him like a familiar embrace. Anna stood behind the counter, arranging croissants on a display plate. At the sound of the bell, she looked up. The plate wobbled in her hands as she saw him, but this time she managed not to drop it. Her face went carefully blank, though Xavier noticed how tightly she gripped the edge of the counter. "Daddy!" Two excited voices called out in unison. The twins, Lena and Colette, he heard someone say, came running from behind a curtained doorway. Their dark curls bounced as they moved, and their matching blue dresses swished around their knees. Xavier stepped back, unsure how to respond to their enthusiasm. One of them reached for his hand, while the other tugged at his suit jacket. Their small faces beamed up at him with complete trust, and something in his chest constricted painfully. "Girls!" Anna's voice was sharp with barely controlled emotion. She hurried around the counter and pulled them back gently but firmly. "I'm so sorry, Monsieur Moreau. They're usually not this forward with strangers." "But Mama," one of the twins started to protest. "No, Lena," Anna cut her off, then turned to Xavier. "You must be mistaken. We knew each other once. That's all." Xavier opened his mouth to question her further, but she was already steering the girls toward a small table in the corner, setting them up with paper and crayons. Her movements were quick and precise, clearly designed to avoid any more interaction with him. Finding himself suddenly alone near the entrance, Xavier chose a table that gave him a clear view of both the counter and the twins. As he sat, something on the wall caught his attention. A mural, partially hidden behind years of wear and water damage. He stood up to examine it more closely. The painting showed a woman playing violin beneath a full moon, her face tilted up in peaceful concentration. The style was distinctive, bold strokes mixed with delicate details. Though the paint was cracked and fading, the violinist's expression still carried profound emotion. Xavier's fingers tingled strangely as he traced the air near the painting, following the curves of the moon. Something about those brush strokes felt familiar. Throughout the morning, Xavier remained at his table, ordering multiple cups of coffee he barely tasted. Anna moved efficiently around the cafe, serving other customers while carefully avoiding his gaze. But he couldn't stop watching the twins as they drew with their crayons, heads bent together in concentration. One of them, Colette, he thought, had his exact profile, right down to the slight arch of her eyebrows. Lena held her crayon the same way he held his drafting pencils, her small hand curved precisely around the wax stick. They shared quiet whispers and occasional giggles, completely absorbed in their artwork. As the morning wore on, the cafe began to empty. Xavier glanced at his phone, several missed calls from his office, but the car still wasn't ready. He should leave, he knew that. But something kept him rooted to his chair, unable to tear himself away from these little girls who moved like mirror images of each other, and who shared so many of his features. Finally, Madame Claret began turning the open sign to closed. Xavier stood slowly, leaving more than enough money on the table to cover his coffee. He walked to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Outside, a light rain had started falling again. Xavier stood under the cafe's awning, water dripping from its edges in steady streams. He turned his face up to the gray sky and whispered, so softly the rain almost drowned it out. "I know you, but I don't know why." Through the cafe window, Anna stood frozen, watching him. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she watched him disappear into the misty afternoon. The morning sun had barely risen when Xavier called his office in Paris. "Cancel my meetings for the week," he said, his voice firm despite his assistant's protests. He ended the call and stared out the inn's window at the quiet village street below. The car was fixed. He could leave, should leave. But those little girls' faces kept pulling at something deep inside him, like a thread slowly unraveling a tightly wound spool. Later that afternoon, Xavier walked through Bellevine's cobblestone streets, taking in the old-world charm he'd missed in the rain. He stopped at a small bookshop, browsing until he found a beautifully illustrated children's story about two sister rabbits who went on adventures together. At the local patisserie, he selected an assortment of delicate pastries, each one carefully placed in a pink box tied with ribbon. The bell above Café Solace's door chimed as Xavier entered. The usual afternoon lull meant only a few customers occupied the tables. Lena and Colette sat at their usual corner spot, surrounded by crayons and paper. They looked up at the sound of the bell, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "You came back!" Colette exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. Lena followed, both girls approaching him with matching excited smiles. Xavier held up the book and pastry box, feeling strangely nervous. "I thought, perhaps you might enjoy these." Anna emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She paused when she saw Xavier with the gifts, her expression a mixture of concern and something softer, almost wistful. But she didn't intervene as the twins led Xavier to their table, each taking one of his hands as if they'd known him forever. "Will you read to us?" Lena asked, already opening the book while Colette peeked inside the pastry box with wide eyes. Xavier glanced at Anna, seeking permission. She gave a small nod, though her shoulders remained tense as she moved to clean nearby tables. The girls settled on either side of him, their small bodies warm against his arms as he opened the book. As Xavier read about the sister rabbit's adventures, he found himself doing different voices for each character, surprising himself with how natural it felt. The twins giggled at his dramatic storytelling, completely absorbed in the tale. They shared the pastries, careful not to get crumbs on the pages, offering him bites between chapters. Anna moved around the cafe, keeping busy with various tasks. As she wiped down a table near them, she began to hum softly, an old French lullaby, the notes drifting through the air like autumn leaves. Xavier's voice faltered mid-sentence. The melody hit him like a physical force, sending him reeling into a sudden flash of memory. He was on a rooftop in Paris, string lights twinkling above. Anna was there, younger, wearing his suit jacket, singing this same tune as she twirled under the stars. Wine glasses clinked. They were laughing. His hand flew to his temple as another memory crashed through. Him standing before the cafe wall, paintbrush in hand. Anna watched from behind, her violin tucked under her chin, playing while he worked. The mural took shape beneath his strokes, inspired by her music. "Are you okay?" Colette's small voice brought him back to the present. Both girls watched him with concern, their hands resting on his arms. Xavier blinked, trying to steady himself. Across the room, Anna had stopped humming, her cloth frozen mid-wipe on the table surface. She'd seen his reaction, and something in her expression had cracked, letting raw emotion show through. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Xavier finished the story, but his mind kept slipping back to those fragments of memory. The twins eventually fell asleep on a small couch in the corner, where they often napped during their mother's evening shift. Anna covered them with a soft blanket, her movements gentle and practiced. When she finally sat down across from Xavier, the cafe was empty except for them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "You left," Anna said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "You never came back. I wrote. I called. Nothing." Her hands were clasped tightly on the table, knuckles white with tension. Xavier stared at her, stunned. I don't remember any of it. Only fragments." He pressed his fingers to his forehead, struggling to make sense of the scattered pieces in his mind. "There was an accident. They told me I hit my head, lost months of memories, but I never knew. I never knew what I'd lost." Anna's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your mother told me you'd chosen your career over us, that you'd gone to London for a big project and didn't want any distractions." She glanced at the sleeping twins. "I was pregnant. I tried to tell you, but all my letters came back unopened. Your phone was disconnected." Xavier felt the room spin slightly. His mother. Of course. She'd always controlled everything, managed everything, especially after his accident. How many other memories had she buried? How many letters had she hidden? Later that night, Xavier sat on the edge of his bed at the inn, his head still swimming with revelations. He pulled out his old leather notebook, the one he always carried, filled with years of sketches and ideas. As he flipped through the pages, a loose sheet fell out. His hand trembled as he picked it up. There, drawn in precise pencil strokes years ago, was the exact image from the cafe mural. A woman playing violin beneath the moon. In the corner, he'd written a single word: Anna. The next morning's light was just beginning to paint the village streets when Xavier approached Café Solace. Through the window, he could see Anna setting up for the day, her movements precise and practiced as she arranged fresh pastries in the display case. The twins sat at their usual table, still in their pajamas, sharing a croissant and giggling over something in a picture book. Xavier took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The bell's gentle chime announced his arrival, causing Anna to look up sharply. Her expression was guarded, but less hostile than before. "Good morning," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. His eyes drifted to the faded mural on the wall. "I'd like to restore it. The painting, no charge." Anna's hands stilled on the pastry tongs. "That's not necessary." "Please," Xavier said, taking a careful step forward. "I remember painting it now. At least, parts of it." He gestured to the worn image. "The colors should be brighter, the moonlight more silver. The violin strings were meant to look like they were actually moving." "Mama, can he fix it?" Lena called from her table, both girls now watching the exchange with interest. "It's so pretty, but some parts are all scratchy now." Colette nodded enthusiastically. "And the moon is getting fuzzy at the edges." Xavier waited as Anna looked between him and their daughters, her internal struggle visible in the way she pressed her lips together. Finally, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "After closing hours only," she said firmly. "And it needs to be finished before the weekend rush." "Of course," Xavier agreed quickly, relief flooding through him. "I'll bring my supplies tonight." Throughout the day, Xavier gathered what he needed from the village's small art supply shop. As he selected paints and brushes, more memories surfaced. The weight of Anna's violin case as he carried it for her through Paris streets, the way she'd curl her fingers around a cup of orange tea, her favorite. He remembered finding that specific blend in specialty shops, leaving boxes of it on her doorstep with small notes. That evening, after the last customer had left and the twins were tucked away upstairs with Madame Clairette watching over them, Xavier began work on the mural. Anna stayed nearby, organizing receipts at the counter, her presence both distracting and comforting. As he mixed colors and began touching up the faded areas, more memories crashed over him in waves. 5 weeks, that's all they'd had together. But in those weeks, he'd memorized everything about her. The way she'd close her eyes when playing particularly moving pieces on her violin. How she'd absently hum while reading. The sound of her laugh when he'd surprise her with impromptu picnics on her tiny balcony. During breaks, Xavier found himself sketching in his notebook. Without really thinking about it, he drew up plans for a new cafe layout, keeping the charm of the original space but adding a dedicated children's area with built-in bookshelves, comfortable reading nooks, and a small stage for performances. He became so absorbed in the design that he left the sketch on the counter when he went to wash his brushes. When he returned, he found Anna standing over the drawing, tears streaming down her face. "Anna?" he said softly, taking a step toward her. She quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You always did this," she whispered. "Saw possibilities in spaces, ways to make things better, more beautiful." Xavier moved closer, his heart pounding. The question that had been burning inside him all day finally burst out. "Why didn't you come find me? Why did you disappear?" Anna's laugh was bitter and broken. "Disappear? I never disappeared, Xavier. I wrote to you every week, for months." Her voice cracked. "I called your office until they blocked my number. I went to your apartment, but you'd moved out. No forwarding address." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "And then, when I was 4 months pregnant, though I didn't know it was twins yet, your mother showed up at my door." Xavier felt his blood run cold. "Genevieve?" Anna nodded, her eyes distant with the memory. She was so elegant, so cold. "She told me you'd moved on, that you were engaged to some diplomat's daughter in London, that you'd specifically asked her to tell me to stop trying to contact you." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. But that wasn't the worst part. Xavier's hands clenched into fists at his sides, dreading what was coming next. "She said she knew I was pregnant, that if I didn't disappear quietly, she would make sure I lost any chance of custody." Anna's whole body trembled. "She had files, Xavier. Documents about my family's financial troubles, about my father's gambling debts. She said she could make it look like I was unstable, unfit to be a mother. She said, ... Anna's voice broke completely. "She said she would make sure my babies were taken away and given to a proper family." Xavier staggered backward until his back hit the wall, his legs barely supporting him. "I was in a car accident," he said, his voice raw. "In Berlin. They told me I hit my head, lost months of memories. I woke up in the hospital with my mother by my side, telling me I'd been there for an important project, that everything was taken care of." He ran his hands through his hair, desperate pieces clicking into place. But she knew. She knew everything. Anna's bitter laugh held years of pain. "Of course she did." Xavier turned back to the mural, picking up his brush with shaking hands. Every stroke now felt like an apology, a desperate attempt to restore not just the painting, but everything that had been stolen from them. As he worked, the woman in the painting seemed to come alive beneath the moonlight. Her violin raised an eternal song, a melody of love, loss, and buried truths finally rising to the surface. The morning sun painted Bellevine's cobblestone streets in soft golden hues as Xavier walked alone through the quiet village. His normally pristine suit was slightly rumpled, his hair uncombed, evidence of a sleepless night spent wrestling with the weight of Anna's revelations. Each step echoed against the ancient stones as his mind replayed her words over and over. The threats, the tears, the years of separation orchestrated by his own mother. He paused at a small fountain in the village square, watching the water cascade down worn stone faces. His reflection rippled back at him, fragmented and unclear, much like his memories. A church bell chimed in the distance, its deep tones reminding him of music, of Anna, of violin strings and laughter and poetry. Poetry. The memory hit him suddenly. Anna curled up in bed, reading verses aloud while he sketched building designs, her voice soft and melodic, bringing the words to life. Without thinking, his feet carried him to a tiny bookshop tucked between a bakery and an antique store. The bell above the door tinkled as he entered, stirring dust motes in the morning light. The elderly shopkeeper barely looked up from his newspaper as Xavier wandered through narrow aisles of books. The familiar musty scent of old paper surrounded him as his fingers trailed along worn spines. And then he saw it, a weathered collection of French poetry, the same edition Anna had owned. The cover was slightly faded, but the gold lettering still caught the light. Vers le cœur, toward the heart. Xavier's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the book. Opening it released that distinctive old book smell that always made Anna smile. He purchased it without hesitation, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. Later that morning, the familiar bell of Café Solace announced his arrival. The twins were already at their usual table, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. They looked up and waved enthusiastically, their matching smiles making his chest tighten with emotion. Anna stood behind the counter, her posture stiffening slightly as he approached. But there was something different in her eyes today, less guarded, more questioning. Xavier placed the poetry book gently on the counter between them. "I remembered," he said softly, "how you used to read from this collection. Your favorite was the one about starlight and second chances." Anna's fingers hovered over the book's worn cover, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Xavier thought she might refuse it. Then, slowly, she picked it up, cradling it like something precious and fragile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet cafe chatter. Throughout the day, Xavier worked on the mural during quiet moments, carefully bringing life back to the faded colors. The twins gravitated toward him, spreading their drawings across a nearby table. Their chatter filled the air as they worked, asking him questions about his life in Paris, about the buildings he designed, about why he lived alone in such a big house. "Don't you have any family?" Colette asked innocently, not looking up from her drawing of what appeared to be a rainbow-colored castle. Lena nodded, adding, "Everyone should have a family. It's the best thing ever." Xavier's hand stilled on the mural, his brush hovering over the violin strings he was retouching. The girl's words pierced something deep inside him, and when he answered, his voice was thick with emotion. "Maybe I lost them before I even knew I had them." The twins exchanged confused looks, but something in his tone made them quiet. They returned to their drawings, occasionally sneaking glances at him as he worked. As evening approached and the cafe emptied, Anna retreated to a corner table with the poetry book. Xavier watched from the corner of his eye as she opened it, saw the moment she discovered what was tucked between its pages. Her sharp intake of breath drew his attention fully. In her trembling hands was an envelope, cream-colored, slightly yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably hers, addressing it to his old Paris office. The letter was still sealed, never opened, never read. How ... Anna's voice cracked. She looked up at Xavier, her eyes wide with realization. "This was one of my letters, one of dozens I sent, but it's never been opened." Xavier crossed the room slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. "I never received any of them, Anna. Not one." He sank into the chair across from her. "I would have remembered. Even with the accident, even with the memory loss, something that important would have come back to me. Like the mural did. Like you did." Anna stared at the envelope, her fingers tracing her own handwriting from years ago. The truth of his words seemed to settle over her like a gentle rain, washing away layers of old pain and doubt. She looked different suddenly, younger, softer, as if a heavy weight had begun to lift from her shoulders. Later that evening, after the cafe closed and dinner was shared at the small apartment above, Xavier found himself following the twins up to their bedroom. They had begged him to hear their prayers, and Anna, after a moment's hesitation, had nodded her permission. He stood awkwardly by their beds as they scrambled under their covers, clearly used to a different routine. Lena's stuffed rabbit fell to the floor, and he picked it up, carefully tucking it back into her arms. Colette's blanket was tangled, and he somewhat clumsily tried to straighten it. "You're not very good at this," Lena giggled, but her tone was affectionate. "No," Xavier admitted with a small smile, "but I'd like to learn." He sat on the edge of Colette's bed as they said their prayers, adding his own silent ones to theirs. When they finished, he leaned down and, after a moment's uncertainty, pressed a gentle kiss to each of their foreheads. "Good night, little ones," he whispered. From the doorway, Anna watched the scene unfold, one hand pressed against her heart as if to keep it from spilling over with emotion. Her fingers trembled against her chest as she observed Xavier's careful, if unpracticed, attempts at fatherhood. In the soft lamplight, she could see both her daughter's features reflected in his. The same gentle slope of nose, the same thoughtful expression as they drifted toward sleep. Back in Paris, the sleek offices of Moreau Architectural Design hummed with their usual efficiency. But something was off. Elise Laurent sat at her immaculate desk, frowning at her computer screen. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped against the polished wood as she read through Xavier's schedule for the third time that morning. Board meetings missed, client calls rescheduled, design reviews postponed. It wasn't like him, any of it. Xavier was many things, but irresponsible had never been one of them. The sharp ping of an incoming email drew her attention. It was from a local supplier in a place called Bellevigne, confirming receipt of architectural sketches for cafe renovations. The sender mentioned being honored to work with Monsieur Moreau personally on such a small project. Elise's frown deepened. Xavier didn't do small projects, and he certainly didn't do cafe renovations. Something wasn't right. After a moment's hesitation, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out her car keys. Whatever was happening in this tiny village, she needed to see for herself. The board was already asking questions, and their biggest client, the Deutsche Group, was threatening to pull their contract if Xavier didn't personally oversee their upcoming project. The drive to Belleville took longer than expected, winding through narrow country roads that her GPS barely recognized. When she finally arrived, the village looked like something from a postcard. All stone buildings and flower boxes with grapevines climbing ancient walls. She parked her Mercedes near a small cafe called Solace, its worn sign creaking gently in the afternoon breeze. As she stepped out of the car, adjusting her tailored blazer, a sound caught her attention. Laughter, high and clear, coming from behind the building. Elise followed the sound, her heels clicking against the cobblestones. As she rounded the corner into a sun-dappled vineyard, she stopped dead in her tracks. There was Xavier, but not the Xavier she knew. His expensive suit was replaced by rolled-up sleeves and casual pants. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, and he was laughing. Actually laughing as he chased two little girls through the rows of vines. But it was the girls that made Elise's breath catch. Even from this distance, she could see it. Xavier's distinctive profile mirrored in their small faces, his characteristic way of tilting his head when listening reflected in their mannerisms. The truth hit her like a physical blow, making her steady herself against the stone wall. She watched as one of the twins tackled Xavier's legs, sending all three of them tumbling onto the grass. Their giggles floated across the vineyard, and Elise felt something in her chest constrict painfully. Later that evening, she waited in the lobby of the small inn where Xavier was staying. When he walked in, still casual in his rolled sleeves, he stopped short at the sight of her. "Elise?" His voice held surprise, but not guilt. Never guilt. That would have been easier to bear. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced calm. "The Deutsche Group is threatening to walk," she said without preamble. "The board wants answers. And I find you here, playing house in a village that's not even on most maps." Xavier ran a hand through his hair, another unfamiliar gesture. The Xavier she knew never showed such uncertainty. "It's complicated," he began. "You're designing cafe renovations now?" Her voice remained professional, but there was an edge to it. "Baking scones, chasing children through vineyards. They're my daughters, Elise." The words hung in the air between them. She'd known, of course, from the moment she'd seen them. But hearing him say it made it real in a way that twisted something deep inside her. Slowly, carefully, Xavier told her everything. About Anna, about his mother's interference, about the accident that stole his memories. Elise listened with the same composed efficiency she brought to all their meetings, even as each word chipped away at something she'd held onto for years. "The firm needs you," she said finally, her voice tight. "The projects, the clients. I don't care." His response was immediate, certain. She'd never heard him sound so sure of anything. After leaving Xavier, Elise found herself walking to Café Solace. The evening crowd was thinning, and a woman she recognized as Anna was wiping down tables. Their eyes met briefly. Anna's curious, Elise's carefully neutral. "Can I help you?" Anna asked, straightening up. "Just coffee, please." Elise settled at the counter, watching as Anna moved behind it with practiced ease. While Anna disappeared into the back kitchen, Elise's attention was drawn to a small wooden box, partially hidden behind some jars. The words, "Returned Mail," were written on its lid in faded ink. With quick, efficient movements, she reached over and opened it. Inside, beneath a stack of newer envelopes, she found what she was looking for, the original letter, its paper yellowed and stained with what could only be tears. The handwriting was desperate, loving, filled with questions that had gone unanswered for so long. Elise closed the box quietly, just as Anna returned with her coffee. The sun was setting when Elise finally found Xavier in the vineyard, standing by the old stone wall. The golden light caught his profile, softening it in a way she'd never seen in all their years working together. She approached silently, the letter heavy in her hand. When she reached him, she held it out without speaking. Xavier looked at it, then at her, confusion crossing his features. "This is yours," she said softly. It always was. The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. She leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, a goodbye to something that had never really been hers to begin with. As she turned to leave, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth, she felt lighter somehow. Behind her, she could hear the sound of paper being carefully unfolded, and the last rays of sunlight caught the tears on her cheeks as she walked away. Thunder rumbled across the darkening sky as Anna flipped the cafe's sign to "closed." The late afternoon storm had driven away the last customers, leaving only the sound of rain drumming against the windows. In the back room, Xavier sat at the small table where the staff usually took their breaks, his fingers tracing the edges of the weathered envelope. Anna's old letter lay between them, its pages yellow with age, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Her handwriting flowed across the paper, desperate, hopeful words written by a younger version of herself. She watched as Xavier's hands trembled slightly while holding the pages. The twins were curled up on the worn leather couch in the corner, their afternoon nap stretching longer than usual. The steady patter of rain had lulled them into deep sleep, their small faces peaceful and untroubled. "Would you?" Anna's voice caught slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Would you read it? Out loud?" Xavier looked up, meeting her eyes. For a moment he seemed uncertain, but then he nodded slowly. He lifted the pages, the paper crinkling softly as he straightened them. "My dearest Xavier," he began, his voice low and unsteady. "It's been 3 weeks since you disappeared. I keep calling your office, but they say you're unavailable. Your phone is disconnected. I don't understand." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room for a brief moment. Xavier's voice grew thicker as he continued. "There's something I need to tell you. Something wonderful and terrifying. I'm pregnant. Twins, the doctor says. I see them in the ultrasound, 2 tiny hearts beating, and all I can think about is how they have your profile already." Anna closed her eyes, tears sliding silently down her cheeks as Xavier read her words from 8 years ago. She remembered writing this letter, sitting at her small desk, hope still alive in her heart. "I know you're busy with your career. I know Paris and your firm need you. But we need you too, your children and I. Please just call. Just let me know you're okay. Let me understand why you left without saying goodbye." Xavier's voice cracked on the last word. He paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "The night before you disappeared, you painted stars on my ceiling and promised to teach our children about constellations. You can't have forgotten that. You can't have forgotten us." Thunder crashed again, closer now. Xavier's hands were shaking so badly he had to set the letter down. When he looked up at Anna, his eyes were wet. "I'm going to Paris tomorrow," he said, his voice firm despite the emotion thick in his throat. "I need to confront my mother." Anna wrapped her arms around herself, shaking her head. "She won't change, Xavier. People like her, they don't change." "This isn't about changing her." His jaw tightened. "She took away my choice, my memories, my family." He gestured to the sleeping twins. "She doesn't get the last word on this." Anna's hand moved involuntarily toward his, but stopped halfway across the table. The old fear was still there, the memory of pain still too fresh. Instead, she pulled back, wrapping her fingers around her coffee cup. A small voice broke the tension. "Papa?" They both turned to see Lena sitting up on the couch, rubbing her eyes. Colette stirred beside her, blinking sleepily. "Can you sing us a song?" Lena asked, her voice still drowsy. Xavier looked uncertain, but then, without seeming to think about it, he began to hum. The melody was soft, gentle, a lullaby Anna knew intimately. Her hand flew to her mouth as she recognized the tune she had sung every night during her pregnancy, the one she still sang to the girls before bed. The twins smiled, settling back against the couch cushions as Xavier continued humming. He didn't know the words, but the melody flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting somewhere in the depths of his memory all these years. Anna couldn't hold back her gasp. Xavier stopped, looking at her in confusion. "That song," she whispered. "How do you know that song?" I don't know," he admitted, looking bewildered. "It just came to me." "Why?" "I sang it every night when I was pregnant. Every single night." Her voice trembled. "The doctors said. They said babies can hear music in the womb, that they remember." Understanding dawned on Xavier's face. Something had remained, despite everything his mother had taken from him. Something had survived in the spaces between conscious memory. Later that night, after Xavier had left and the twins were asleep upstairs, Anna stood alone in the kitchen. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle drizzle that made the windows weep. She moved to the newly restored mural, her fingers reaching out to touch the painted violin. Her violin, captured in oils and memories. The cracked surface of the wall reflected her face dimly, like a broken mirror showing fragments of who she used to be. The woman who had loved freely, who had believed in the power of music and art and love. The woman who had written that letter with such hope. Anna leaned closer to the mural, studying the careful brushstrokes that had survived 8 years of neglect until Xavier had restored them. Each line was filled with the care of both past and present, the love that had inspired the original painting, and the dedication that had gone into bringing it back to life. "Maybe we weren't a mistake," she whispered to her fractured reflection, the words barely audible in the quiet kitchen. The painted violin seemed to glow softly in the dim light, its strings forever frozen in mid-play, creating silent music that only memory could hear. Like the lullaby Xavier had hummed, some things remained, buried deep, waiting to be rediscovered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone driveway as Elise's car wound through the outskirts of Paris. Xavier sat in the passenger seat, his fingers absently tracing the edges of the old letter in his lap. The drive from Belleville had been mostly silent, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of paper. Elise kept her eyes fixed on the road, her usual professional demeanor masking the tension in her shoulders. She had offered to drive without being asked, understanding that Xavier needed space to think. The familiar streets of Paris felt different now, as if the city itself had shifted during his absence. As they approached the Moreau estate, Xavier's posture stiffened. The mansion loomed ahead, a masterpiece of modern architecture with its clean lines and imposing presence. Cold marble facades stretched upward, meeting the sky with uncompromising precision. The iron gates stood like sentinels, their intricate metalwork as forbidding as ever. Nothing had changed. The perfectly manicured gardens still displayed their geometric patterns. The fountain still sprayed its measured arcs of water. Even the gravel crunched beneath the car's tires with the same controlled rhythm it always had. Elise pulled up to the front entrance and cut the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy with anticipation. "Would you like me to wait here?" she asked quietly. Xavier shook his head. This won't take long." They walked together to the massive front door, their footsteps echoing against the marble steps. Before Xavier could ring the bell, the door opened smoothly, revealing a uniformed housekeeper who ushered them inside with practiced efficiency. Geneviève Moreau stood at the top of the curved staircase, one hand resting lightly on the polished banister. Time had added touches of silver to her dark hair, but her posture remained impeccable, her expression a study in controlled surprise. "Xavier," she said, her voice carrying the faintest hint of warmth. "What an unexpected pleasure." Her eyes flickered briefly to Elise before returning to her son. "Though usually you call first." Xavier didn't move from his position at the bottom of the stairs. "We need to talk, Mother." Something in his tone made Geneviève pause. She descended the stairs with measured steps, her heels clicking against the marble. "Of course. Shall we use the study?" The study was exactly as Xavier remembered it. Leather-bound books lining the walls, a massive desk dominating the space, everything arranged with precise intention. Geneviève settled into her chair behind the desk while Xavier remained standing. Elise positioned herself quietly near the door. Xavier placed the letter on the desk between them. "Do you recognize this?" Geneviève didn't even glance at it. "Should I?" "It's from Anna Delacour. One of many she sent after I'd disappeared." His voice was steady but cold. "Letters you made sure I never received." "Ah." Geneviève leaned back slightly. "The waitress. The mother of my children." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Geneviève's face. "You had your future ahead of you, Xavier, not behind you in some provincial cafe with a waitress." "My future?" Xavier's laugh was bitter. "You mean the future you chose for me? After my accident in Berlin, an accident I still can't fully remember, you reconstructed my life, piece by piece, erasing anything that didn't fit your vision." Geneviève's expression remained composed. "You were injured, confused. I simply helped you focus on what mattered." "What mattered?" Xavier's voice rose slightly. "I have twin daughters I never knew existed. A woman I loved who thought I abandoned her. Years of memories stolen because you decided they were inconvenient." "Love." Genevieve's lip curled slightly. 5 weeks of summer infatuation is hardly love, Xavier. You were building something important. Your firm was expanding, your reputation growing. I wasn't about to watch you throw it all away for some romantic fantasy. Xavier placed his hands on the desk, leaning forward. Why threaten her? For the first time, Genevieve's composure wavered slightly. I beg your pardon? You went to her apartment. You threatened her and her unborn children, your own grandchildren. Why? Geneviève stood slowly, her eyes hardening. Because weakness ruins men like you. Her voice was ice. Because I've watched talented men destroy themselves over pretty faces and emotional impulses. I raised you to be better than that. Something final broke in Xavier's expression. He straightened up, reaching into his jacket to withdraw an envelope. This is my resignation from the firm. I'm transferring operational control to Elise, effective immediately. The board has already been notified. Don't be absurd, Geneviève scoffed. You're acting on emotion. No, Mother. For the first time in 8 years, I'm acting on truth. He placed the envelope beside the letter. I'm cutting all ties. The apartment, the trust fund, everything. It's done. Genevieve's laugh was sharp and cold. And what will you do? Play house with your cafe owner. Become a small-town architect designing storage sheds. Xavier turned away, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. You protected an empire, he said softly. I wanted a home. The drive back was quiet again, but differently this time. The tension had been replaced with something lighter, despite the weight of what had just occurred. Paris began to recede behind them, its lights growing dimmer in the distance. Elise glanced at Xavier. Are you sure about this? He watched the city blur in the rearview mirror, thinking of Anna's letter, of the twins' faces, of the melody that had somehow survived in his heart for 8 years. "I wasn't supposed to forget her," he said quietly. "But you don't forget love. Not really." The car continued down the highway, leaving Paris, and everything it represented, behind them. The city lights faded to pinpoints in the mirror, like stars being swallowed by distance and time. The morning light filtered through the cafe windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floors. Anna was wiping down tables, her mind elsewhere, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and froze. Xavier stood in the doorway, a leather suitcase in his hand, his usual tailored suit replaced by a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. "Xavier?" Her voice wavered slightly. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon after his departure to Paris. "Is everything—" He stepped inside, letting the door close softly behind him. The morning sunlight caught the silver at his temples, and Anna noticed the subtle changes in his bearing, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I walked away from everything," he said quietly, his voice steady but gentle. "The board, the firm, my mother." Anna's hand tightened around the cloth she was holding. "What?" Xavier set his suitcase down and reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, letterhead she recognized from news articles about his firm. He held it out to her. "My resignation letter, signed and dated." Anna's hands trembled as she took the document. Her eyes scanned the formal language, the clear finality of his signature at the bottom. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of regret or uncertainty. She found none. "But your work, your life in Paris." "Wasn't my life," he said simply. "Not really." The morning passed in a blur of quiet activity. Xavier offered to help with some repairs around the cafe that Anna had been putting off. They worked side by side, painting walls in soft cream colors, their movements gradually finding an easy rhythm together. Lena and Colette darted between them, giggling as they tried to help with their own tiny paintbrushes. Their laughter echoed through the cafe, bright and unreserved. Xavier's face softened every time they called him over to inspect their work, his natural precision giving way to genuine delight at their enthusiastic, if messy, contributions. "Papa, look!" Colette held up her paint-smeared hands proudly. "I'm helping!" The word Papa still caught in Anna's throat sometimes, but watching Xavier kneel down to examine their daughter's handiwork with complete seriousness made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Very professional," he told Colette solemnly, making her beam. "Though perhaps we should get those hands cleaned up before lunch." The domesticity of it all felt surreal to Anna. Xavier in old clothes speckled with paint, the girls circling him like satellites, the way he seemed to fit so naturally into the space she'd carved out for their little family. It was everything she'd once dreamed of, everything she'd forced herself to stop hoping for. As evening approached, Anna found herself saying, Would you like to stay for dinner?" Xavier's eyes met hers, warm and hopeful. "I'd love to." The kitchen filled with the rich aroma of lentil stew, a simple meal, nothing like the fine restaurants Xavier must be used to. But he sat at their worn wooden table as if it was exactly where he belonged, helping Lena blow on her spoonful to cool it, wiping Colette's chin with a napkin. The girls, usually shy with strangers, treated him as if he'd always been there. They crawled into his lap after finishing their bowls, demanding stories about the buildings he'd designed. Xavier obliged, but rather than talking about grand towers, he told them about a treehouse he'd built as a boy, making them giggle with tales of fallen hammers and crooked walls. After the girls were tucked into bed, their small faces peaceful in sleep, Anna found Xavier standing by the cafe's back door. He held it open for her, gesturing to the small garden patio where string lights twinkled in the growing darkness. They sat together on the old wooden bench, close enough to feel each other's warmth, but not quite touching. The night air was soft with early summer, carrying the scent of nearby lavender and the distant sound of crickets. Xavier's hand found hers in the gentle light. His touch was careful, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and earnest. "These past days, being here, it wasn't just about remembering you, or even about the girls." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I remembered what I felt like with you, who I was when we were together." Anna turned to look at him, her heart beating faster at the raw honesty in his expression. "All those years," he continued, "I thought I was building something important, towers reaching for the sky, structures that would outlast me." He shook his head slightly. "But I wasn't building towers with you, Anna. I was building a life, a real one. And somehow, even when I couldn't remember you, I knew something was missing. I knew I wasn't whole." The string lights cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the vulnerability in his eyes. Anna felt tears gathering in her own, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of recognition, of seeing the man she'd loved 8 years ago emerging fully from behind the walls his mother had built around him. She didn't speak. Words felt too small for the moment, too inadequate for everything rising in her heart. Instead, she leaned forward slowly, giving him time to understand her intention. Her lips met his in a kiss that was gentle, trembling, real. A kiss that carried 8 years of longing, of questions, of hope never quite extinguished. It was a kiss that felt like a promise whispered between two broken hearts, finding their rhythm again. The spring morning dawned bright and clear over Belleville, the village already humming with anticipation for its annual festival. Inside Café Solas, Xavier sat at his usual corner table. Architectural sketches spread before him as he mapped out the festival booth layouts for the town square. His precise lines had softened somewhat, the technical drawings punctuated by splashes of color from the twins' enthusiastic contributions. "Papa, can we make this one pink?" Lena asked, pointing to a flower stall sketch with her crayon poised. "Of course," Xavier replied, his smile gentle as he watched her carefully fill in the space. Beside her, Colette was determined to add every color possible to the music stage drawing. At the counter, Anna worked steadily, the rhythm of her hands kneading dough as familiar as breathing. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the fresh paint on the walls and making the restored mural glow. She hadn't noticed Xavier's latest addition yet. 2 small figures dancing near the violinist's feet, their dresses swirling with joy. "What do you think about placing the wine-tasting booth next to the cheesemaker?" Xavier called over to Anna, his architect's mind still seeking perfect balance and flow. "Madame Rousseau would love that," Anna replied, dusting flour from her hands. "She's been trying to convince everyone her goat cheese pairs perfectly with the local rosé." The cafe filled with the warm scent of baking pastries and the sound of the girls' giggles as they continued coloring. It was domestic and ordinary, and somehow extraordinary all at once. This family they were slowly becoming. Xavier stood to pin the completed layouts to the cafe's bulletin board, pausing to study the mural. His fingers traced the edges of the new addition, remembering how he'd stayed late the night before to paint the dancing girls while Anna and the twins slept upstairs. The secret addition felt right, completing the picture in a way that went beyond mere restoration. As morning shifted to afternoon, festival preparations kicked into high gear. The town square filled with villagers setting up booths and stringing lights between the ancient plane trees. Xavier helped carry tables while the twins supervised, offering important suggestions about where to place the face painting station. Anna watched from the cafe doorway, her heart full at the sight of Xavier lifting Colette onto his shoulders so she could help hang paper lanterns. He moved differently now, more freely, as if the weight of his former life had finally lifted completely. The evening approached too quickly, bringing with it the festival's opening ceremony. Anna's hands shook slightly as she took her violin case from its hiding place in the back room. She hadn't performed in public since before the twins were born, but the festival committee had been insistent. They remembered her playing from years ago and wanted to feature local talent. The stage looked larger than she remembered as she stood in the wings, clutching her violin. People filled the square, their voices a low murmur of anticipation. Anna felt her courage wavering. "I can't," she whispered, turning away from the stage. "It's been too long." But Xavier was there, steady and present. He took her trembling hand in his touch grounding her. "I forgot everything else," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "But your music never left me. Even when I couldn't remember your face or your name, the melodies stayed. They were waiting for me to find my way back." Anna's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him. The twins dozed against his chest, peaceful and trusting. They had his nose, she thought suddenly, and her chin. Perfect little combinations of love lost and found again. "Play for them," Xavier whispered. "Play for us." Taking a deep breath, Anna stepped onto the stage. The lights were warm on her face as she lifted the violin to her shoulder. The wood felt familiar against her chin, like greeting an old friend. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes floated out over the crowd, tentative at first, then growing stronger. It was the lullaby she'd sung to her unborn daughters, the one Xavier had hummed without knowing why. The melody carried 8 years of longing, of fear transformed into hope, of love that refused to be forgotten. From the side of the stage, Xavier's voice joined the music, soft, barely audible, but perfect in harmony. The twins slept on his shoulders, their small faces peaceful as their mother's music wrapped around them like a blanket. The audience sat spellbound, unaware of the years of separation and reunion woven into each note. They couldn't know how many nights Anna had played this piece alone in her room, crying for the love she thought was lost forever. They couldn't see the memories flickering behind Xavier's eyes as he hummed. Fragments of rooftop evenings and stolen kisses, of music and moonlight and promises that had taken 8 years to keep. When the last note faded into the evening air, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began. Anna lowered her violin, her hands steady now, her heart full. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the square grew quiet, Anna returned to the cafe to close up. The twins were still sleeping, now tucked safely in their beds upstairs. As she approached the counter, she noticed something that hadn't been there before, a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside, folded carefully, was Xavier's old jacket, the one she'd danced in that night in Paris, the one she'd thought lost along with everything else. The fabric was worn soft with age, but she would have known it anywhere. She pressed it to her chest, breathing in traces of memory and promise. "It still fits," Xavier's voice came quietly from the kitchen doorway. "If you want it to." The morning sun cast long shadows across Bellevine's winding streets as Xavier stood at his studio window, sipping coffee and reviewing his latest designs. The converted stone house, perched just above the village's ancient vineyard, had become everything he'd dreamed of creating. A true home, filled with light and laughter and the constant patter of small feet. Through the window, he could see the cafe's terrace in the distance, already bustling with early customers. The sight brought a smile to his face. Anna had transformed Café Solace over the past year, adding the playroom he'd sketched so long ago and rebuilding the terrace to host their weekly music nights. The mural inside had become something of a local legend, with visitors often asking about the mysterious violinist and the 2 dancing girls at her feet. His design studio occupied the ground floor of their home, a warm space with exposed wooden beams and walls lined with sketches. Gone were the sleek glass towers and imposing structures of his past. Now his drawings featured cozy reading nooks, garden-facing kitchens, and spaces meant for families to grow together. His current project was for a young couple in the village, their first home, designed around their dreams rather than status. The sound of footsteps on the stairs drew his attention. Anna appeared in the doorway, wearing his old jacket despite the warm spring morning. The twins darted past her, their matching sundresses swirling as they raced to hug his legs. "Papa, is it time for the surprise yet?" Lena bounced on her toes, her eyes bright with excitement. "Almost," Xavier chuckled, setting down his coffee cup. "Did you help Maman pack the picnic basket?" "We put in all the good things," Colette assured him solemnly. "Even the chocolate cookies." Anna stepped closer, slipping her arm around his waist. "The morning rush is done, and Marie can handle the cafe until evening. We're all yours." They set out together, walking the narrow path that wound through the vineyard. The morning air was sweet with wildflowers, and butterflies danced between the rows of vines. The twins ran ahead, their laughter echoing across the peaceful landscape as they stopped to gather flowers. Xavier carried the picnic basket in one hand, his other intertwined with Anna's. She hummed softly as they walked, the same melody that had brought them back together, now a familiar part of their daily life. The old jacket hung loose on her shoulders, a comfortable reminder of their past and present merged into one. "Look, Papa," Lena called out, pointing to a particularly vibrant patch of wildflowers. "Can we pick these for the table?" "Of course," Xavier replied, watching as both girls carefully selected the prettiest blooms. Their small hands worked with surprising gentleness, creating miniature bouquets with serious concentration. They found the perfect spot in a sun-dappled field, where the grass was soft and the view stretched across the entire valley. Xavier spread out the blanket while Anna helped the girls arrange their collected flowers in the center. The simple act of setting up their picnic felt sacred somehow, a ritual of togetherness that still amazed him daily. As they settled onto the blanket, Xavier reached into the basket and pulled out his sketchbook. The twins immediately crowded closer, knowing their father's drawings usually meant something exciting was coming. "What are you building now, Papa?" Colette asked, leaning against his shoulder. Xavier opened the book to reveal detailed plans for a treehouse. Not just any treehouse, but one with spiral stairs wrapping around the trunk, flower boxes hanging from each window, and a tiny balcony perfect for stargazing. The design incorporated elements from both girls' dreams: Lena's request for a secret trapdoor, and Colette's wish for a special spot to read. The twins' eyes grew wide as they studied the drawings. "You're the best builder, Papa," they shouted in unison, throwing their arms around his neck. Xavier looked at Anna over their heads, his heart full. "It's the first thing I ever built that really mattered," he said softly. The truth of those words settled deep in his chest. All those award-winning buildings, the prestigious projects, the global recognition, none of it compared to creating spaces for his family's joy. They spent the afternoon in peaceful contentment, sharing stories and snacks as clouds drifted overhead. The girls took turns pointing out cloud shapes and making up elaborate tales about cloud creatures. Anna leaned back against Xavier's chest, his arms wrapped around her as they listened to their daughter's imagination unfold. As the sun began its descent, painting the vineyard in shades of gold and amber, Colette suddenly turned to her parents with a thoughtful expression. Her question came with the innocent wisdom only children seem to possess. "Did we find you, or did you find us?" Xavier tightened his arm around Anna, remembering that rainy night when he first saw their faces pressed against the cafe window. He thought about all the twists of fate that had led him back to them: the broken GPS, the stalled car, the persistent pull of memories he hadn't known were memories. "We found each other," he answered, smiling at his daughter, through the glass. They packed up the picnic as the golden light bathed everything in warm radiance. The family walked hand in hand through the rows of vines, their shadows stretching long behind them. The twins skipped between their parents, still clutching their wildflower bouquets. Anna wore Xavier's jacket like a badge of belonging, and his face held the peaceful expression of a man who had finally found his way home. If you enjoyed the story of Xavier and Anna, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. If you enjoyed the story of Xavier and Anna, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.